I wanted to kind of, first of all, introduce myself. My name is Stephan Clambaneva, as you heard from Clara. And is this working? Come on, guys. Not sure why it's not working. Well, again, I know how to say my name. Ooh. Okay. All right. So that's me. So welcome back. My name is Stephan Clambaneva. I'm a design business consulting director for Dessault Systèmes. Kind of show of hands real quick. How many people are familiar with Dessault Systèmes? God, more than I would have thought. I'll ask the question. You know, so if you, a lot of people know. So for the rest of you, we're one of the largest, or the largest software company that focuses on PLM, product lifecycle management, design, engineering, manufacturing software, end-to-end, from ideation all the way to end of life, including manufacturing, logistics. We're over 15,000 people. As you can see, how many countries. Knowing where things are going in this space, especially, we took a very specific focus in rebranding ourselves, becoming the 3D experience company because of knowing where things are going. So I wanted to point that out. You know, honestly, we're 12 brands covering the entire product development phase and 12 different industries. So you can imagine the size and complexity of the kinds of things that we do and what we offer. I did want to point out that we won't have time for specific Q&A because I kind of condensed my talk, a lot of stuff to cover, but if you want to speak with me, we can just go out afterwards. But if you do have a specific question related to roadmap, that's not me. I have David Randall, who's here. Stand up real quick to say hello, David. Who can answer any questions specifically to SOLIDWORKS after the talk outside. So kind of kicking things off right off the bat. What do you know about DaVinci? So, you know, we can, you know, he is who we think of when we think of when we say Renaissance man, right? The original hybrid designer. You know, Leonardo was not only a painter, sculptor, and writer, but he was also an inventor, architect, engineer, mathematician, and an amateur anatomist. I mean, think of that. So that's kind of who we're talking about here. I wanted to frame a couple of questions in kicking off my talk today. So why would I bring up DaVinci when we're talking about AR? Well, the question here is really to get it ruse out of you to start thinking about the fact that although it's important to get the tech right, it's not all about the tech. It's not about the tool itself, but what you do with it. And you know, the reality is that he's been able to open his mind, and in his in the years back in the 15th century, he was way ahead of his time. And that's the quote that I used here: "When mind and hand do not go hand together, or hand to hand, or they don't go together, you cannot create art." And what I mean by that is we maybe have lost that connection, and I think we have to go back a little bit, think back how they thought back those hundreds of years ago before we can move forward. So, I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Hands up, how many people in the room here were consider themselves kind of like at the forefront of Pokemon Go when it first came out? Not a lot of you. A couple. Okay. Well, the people that really got swept up into this, because really it really got this visceral response from when you got into it. In fact, I had a friend of mine who I said hello, and he wouldn't greet my hand because he was so into the game, he completely didn't even want to talk to me. So what kind of games do we play? There's even a new version coming out very shortly about Pokemon Go founders that are focusing on something for Harry Potter. It's going, and all the people that are really interested about it are not even, there's not even any release date, and they're coming up with their own ideas about it. So it's amazing what we see. And let me ask another question. How many of you in the room are designers or consider yourselves designers? So okay, half the room, that's good. Let's juxtapose those questions that I've been asking. What kind of design tools do you use today? we're lucky if, like myself, you got a space mouse, so X, Y, and Z, and maybe a Wacom tablet, right? Now, so for the other folks that are in the room, so how many of you guys are sort of a headset AR developer? Hands. Okay, so a couple of you guys. So you should be talking to each other. You should make sure that each and every one of you is, introduce yourself, collaborate together on a project, because I think that's the best way we can go forward in terms of developing things. The other question I want to ask before we dive into things is, how do you design? What is your design? What is your holistic process? Now, if we're talking about, and we hear Joe Pine talking about, we are in the age of experience, what does that really mean? If we're talking about IoT and connected devices, how is our design process going to change to incorporate and to bring these things into the develop the right tools and experiences for the world that we're living in? So, in all these questions, I wanted to sort of point out that I think we're going towards a paradigm shift today. We're dealing with this transformation, just like there's a lot of parallels I can draw between what DaVinci was going through during Renaissance and what we're seeing today. So in the 60s, we had this thing where huge rooms, this is a picture from GM in the 1960s, of their drafts, a lot of draftsmen drawing a lot on paper and pencil. In the 90s, we have our laptops, we're in conference rooms. I could argue that we're now in this new phase where we're really starting to think about going from drafting to computer-aided design to cognitive augmented design. And the maturity of the tech that we're seeing there is at a tipping point that's moving us quickly into a new era for designers. So I'm going to really break things down in sort of 3 sets of 3s today. First things first, the AR, in the way I'm talking, in the context of what I'm talking about today, is in the general sense of making things better. So it could be everything. Your life, the way you work, the way you live. And so I've kind of looked at this and broken it into these 3 cases. So starting with the top, living your life in augmented reality. That's where sort of the majority of the use cases that we're seeing, whether you've gone to CES or you've been here and you've visited the Expo, you're seeing a lot of those use cases falling under that first category, AR for the masses. I'm more interested in the latter 2. So designing in augmented reality and augmented reality plus design. So adding a little bit of design using the medium of augmented reality to create something and add some value. I'm really interested in these, and I believe so should you. So if we start through and take them from top to bottom, living your life in augmented reality, it's interesting. ODG says that there will be 1 billion active users by 2020. That's a pretty big number, but I think we're just about scratching the surface with how that's going to become more and more ubiquitous. There's examples that I'm going to highlight here, just a couple of them, just to point out that the things that we're seeing, a lot of examples that we're seeing today, is information on the go. So information that's going to be able to allow you to eliminate the screen. And hopefully, if there are tons of other examples where even if you're walking, you're no longer, I don't know if you've heard this term, the zombie walk, where you're walking across in the street and you're looking down, you're not even looking where you're going. Hopefully we can eliminate the screen, we can get rid of the device, and we can focus on what's happening around you again, right? So another example is how do you provide actionable insights for on-the-spot decision making? Would it be nice if you can give back the power back to the consumer for on the spur of the moment decisions, but making the right decisions, right? And for those obvious retail environments. And then another example I wanted to highlight is mixed reality for enjoyment. This is kind of where everything started, whether it was part of the gaming industry or whether it was film and marketing. We're seeing a lot of that sort of movement in the space, especially around education, social interaction, mixed reality. Now, the real interesting examples that I'm seeing in this space is, especially since I live in New York, is in the museum space. So having a lot of inanimate objects that have no context is a very ripe use case for these kinds of things, and I'm really excited to where some of the players are really heading in this space. So Just to give you an example, I'm just going to point to a small project that we did kind of just to kind of create an automotive immersive experience, something that's a little fun and a kind of a different point of view from a user and from a worker within a Formula One example. So here's a video that I'm going to let play. There's a little audio, if you can hear it, hopefully.
Sometimes
there we go.
We just know this is the right way to go. When the world converges.
So I'll set this up a little bit. We're working with a car manufacturer and car company, a racing company, and wanted to kind of put it in kind of almost like a gaming environment. How it's obviously there's some practical uses as well, but being able to see it firsthand. If you were in the pit, part of the pit crew, what were some of the things that you could be doing? And even if you weren't an expert, how can you support the team here? And so you're kind of immersing yourself in that environment.
An experience to show the tremendous potential of augmented reality. We are happy to bring today
It's a little low, huh? I don't know if you can hear it. So we showcased this at one of our Design in the Age of Experience showcases in Milan, in Italy, during the Milan Design Week. So again, superimposing augmented reality data on top of something real interesting implications of the kind of use cases and kind of building that kind of capability that we'd like to show. Now, going to the second section that I'm going to be talking about is kind of enhancing augmented reality with a little bit of design. So in this case, here's where we're really interested. Here's where a lot of our clients, because we're in the B2B business, are really taking advantage of some of these examples. And I'm gonna point out that there's this augmented communication of business cases. So how do you make the case if you're dealing with a very complex project, if you're dealing with things that are really difficult to convey if you have multiple stakeholders in a project, you need the right context. So I'll give you an example. If you can automate or improve the buying process of a car. A lot of people may have seen who's heard of TrueCar, for example. I think that's a great idea of a company that really showcasing the kind of looking at the experience of optimizing that car buying experience. Visual merchandising. How do you create a personalized experience for a retail environment for somebody walking into a store? In the case of data access, how do you get data access for decision-making processes? So dynamic, operational, logistical information for the right at that particular time that you need it. Then you have social innovation. You have ideation becoming the norm. You have cross-discipline teams. So designers working with non-designers. You need to be able to come to a common ground to agree. And so very often we need to be able to use design reviews and doing in the case of augmented reality really supports that environment for innovation strategies and validates the use case. So if we were to use another example, it's contextually supporting the case studies that we're talking about. So I'll give you another example of the project that we did. We did a project for the future of a particular city. So what will the city of Grenoble look in 2040, for example? So there you're trying to talk about bringing together all the people that live there, the city, the mayor, all the different services that come up, so water, air, electricity. How do you bring all these people together? Well, the power of 3D eliminates the ambiguity and fosters agreement. So you have people that come at the complete opposite ends of this, but coming together over a common project that they can really visualize helps them sort of compromise and understands the other person's problems and challenges. And then, the reality is the most important thing about developing an experience is the scenario, which means that, you can't really develop it properly unless it creates a compelling business case. So you really have to make sure that you're using that multisensorial environment to develop something that's really powerful. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go through one example from our relationship with Meta. SOLIDWORKS can provide sort of the 3D file, and then importing that in using the augmented reality environment through Meta can help that workflow and allows that really rich design review that's not possible without using that environment. So I'm going to show a quick video here that's going to illustrate that. So real quick, it's using the watch as an example. As we heard from Joe, that's sitting in the audience here on Wednesday, you want to be able to transfer idea that's in your mind from one mind to somebody else's without losing its authenticity. I think that's very powerful. And that allows you to drive that lower time to market, that lower development costs, and that allows that collaboration to occur naturally over a medium that everybody can understand, because you have that universal language of 3D in augmented reality. So the third and last section I wanted to cover is where I think one of the most interesting, but it's a little bit farther out, is designing directly in augmented reality. So designing augmented reality means augmented design. It means it's sort of the evolution from design thinking to experience thinking. So imagine if you can now have an augmented context. Seeing is believing. Immersing yourself in the situation with all the nuances, and that's what really makes all the difference. Context is everything. The other point I wanted to mention is we all as designers talk about empathy all the time. Imagine if you can supercharge that. Imagine if you can create an environment that, human-centered design, inclusive design, that allows everybody, even without that design background, sort of to exercise that empathy muscle. With augmented empathy, you can truly design for your users. And another example that where our personal investment is really focusing in on is designing directly in 3D. So imagine, I'll give you another example. Kevin Bethune from BCT Digital Ventures mentioned in his TED Talk that designers are superheroes. And we are unwilling chaining their creativity and innovation by constricting them to their desks and their screens. We need to set them free. We need to unleash their powers of their superpowers. And in this case, that's what I want to showcase a little bit here, is what if you could, to highlight that example, what if you could eliminate the screen? What would that look like?
That's it. That's the signal. Got it. I got it. Yes. Let's go for it. Got it.
So this is taking a very mundane, very basic object, but imagine if you could take that basic object and focus on how you interact with it. So that's why we make it very simple in this case. Focus on the way that you're able to potentially start to play with that, eliminating everything that you might use before. So instead of having buttons and using a mouse on the X and Y plane, you're interacting directly in augmented reality with the object. You're allowing to
voice recognition.
You're allowing to set up collaborative environments so everybody can see each other's
Viewer
work.
mode.
And you're able to really apply, in some cases, if you remember Minority Report as a movie, this is sort of, you can, relates back to that a little bit, so you can sort of see the way that we were thinking about this when we put this together. But again, in the context of designers, focusing on the product development process, it really tries to take you through the entire workflow of how these kinds of tools can be developed. applying materials, doing quick simulations in a way that would require, in the current form, a lot of specialized work. There's a lot of automation taking place in the background here. Imagine if we could do this sort of thing without any other screen in front of you. So, because I'm running a little bit out of time, I wanted to point out where we are today. So, just circling back to where we were during our talk. Here we are. We talked about DaVinci. Perhaps augmented is what he really meant by the Vitruvian Man. So, if you're familiar with his work, if he could do all of these sort of things, examples of all the different things that he made back in the 15th century with the bare tools that he had, maybe the better question to you is, if we can design directly in this new medium, eliminating the metaphor and seeing what's in your mind's eye, what can you imagine as the new generation of augmented designers? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephan.